We're going to transition. Grab that microphone like you wanted the Temptation, Tom Houck. How you doing, brother? All right, I got my white soul brother in here. Tom, how you been, man?
Good afternoon.
All right, now, Tom.
My young friend, I used to listen to this station before you were born.
No, don't tell them all of that.
You know, I mean, I used to listen to this station when I was driving Dr. King, and he would turn it up full blast. In those days, you know, there was no real FM. It was really AM. FM was just coming in. But AOK, which was the people's station back then, and it still is. Mm-hmm. You know, we used to have ERD and WeGo back then. But AOK was what Dr. King would listen to. So I go way, way back here in the early mid-'60s.
Let's talk, because you just blazed through about 30, 40 years worth of history, and we're going to slow you down. Tell us where you're from, Tom.
Well, I'm originally from, Boston, from Cambridge, but I wound my way to Jacksonville, Florida, living with an aunt, and winding up going to Selma in 1965 after John Lewis got his head, Hosea and John. People oftentimes forget that Hosea Williams was the co-marcher across that bridge. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, Jose said to John, "Can you swim?" And John said no, and Jose said, "I can't either." But after that bloody Sunday march, I decided that high school wasn't the place for me. Plus, I was a rabble-rouser in this all-white high school trying to integrate it, and it was named after the founder of the Klan. So I went to Selma. And wound up working for SNCC in the summer of 65. And then ended up working with Hosea Williams in Birmingham in 66 when we had what was called Birmingham 2. After the Voting Rights Act of 65 was passed, we still couldn't get registrars in Birmingham, so we had to have demonstrations in Birmingham. Dr. King was looking for some people to come back to Atlanta to help answer mail, and Jose was kind of making a joke of it, saying no one here knows how to write. And I raised my hand, and I said I could write, so I came back to Atlanta to answer mail, and wound up driving for Dr. King and his family for almost a year.
Talk about that, because young white students...
I wasn't even a student. I got kicked out of high school for going to Selma. I never finished high school.
But it was kind of like what I'm seeing, snapshot of Black Lives Matter, because you go to some Black Lives Matter, very integrated process. What did people say? What did your people say to you?
Well, I didn't really care what they said. I mean, but I was organizing a lot of white kids in Jacksonville, Florida, to be involved in the movement. And in Jacksonville, you didn't have SCLC or you didn't have SNCC, you had NAACP, NAAC Youth Council. And I'd bring these white kids and their parents would get so at me for getting these kids involved, in the demonstrations and so forth in Jacksonville and the sit-in movement. I actually first went to St. Augustine when I was 15.
Wow!
And met the great Willie Bolden and and then J.T. Johnson. Andy said that he was part of that, but I didn't see much of him. No, I'm kidding you, Andy.
No, Andy tells the story now. Willie Bolden he called into the show last week before the funeral for Willie Bolden. Right. Almost in tears. And those of us who know, as we call him affectionately, Andy, up close, we know he's very sentimental. Mm-hmm. But I never knew the depth of love that he had for Willie Bolden. That man, and those who close to him, would tell you when Willie Bolden died, he was weeping. A
great one. That was Dr. King. He was a captain in the Foot Soldiers Brigade. For SCLC.
All right, when we come back, we're going to ask Tom Houck. He's sitting either at 332 Auburn Avenue, whatever the address was, and somebody said, "Here's the keys. We need you to take Dr. King around." And I'm sure he said, "Who? We're gonna go soon." What he said. What did you say when you first? When we come back from the break, they say, "Here go the keys." We want you to tell us, what was he driving around in?
You got it.
What did Dr. King, that was before cell phone, so he couldn't be in the back talking on the cell phone. What did he do when he was riding around? And our special guest today, yesterday we had a great. Now we got another great. He does a great civil rights too. We're going to talk about that too. If you want to know where the landmarks here are in Atlanta, you want to know all about what it was like to ride with a king. We'll come back. Tom Houck will tell us all about it. We'll be back. It's News and Talk 1380 WAOK. All right, welcome back to News and Talk 1380 WAOK. Our special guest inside the studio. Yesterday we had Herman Skip Mason. We talked about a lot of places, the vanishing Atlanta. And we have Tom Houck. Tom came, said you were in high school. They had dropped out of high school.
Well, I got kicked out of high school.
Kicked out of high school.
I went to Selma, and I was AWOL from school for 2 weeks for a good cause.
Now, people don't realize, and I do know, because even as a young man, I used to sit down with Uncle Jose. That was really a protest movement. Selma was. It wasn't supposed to happen. You had Hosea there. You had James Bevel. And they were basically had been told, do not march.
Bernard Lafayette was over there. Right, Bernard.
But they said, well, we'll have a little march. Dr. King is back in the line. He really won't hear much about this. Lo and behold, it was a watershed event.
What happened was Jimmy Lee Jackson had been shot in Marion a couple of days before this, okay? And what Selma became was the focal point. And you had a woman named Miss Boynton over there that was
Amelia Boynton,
right? Who was I mean, just tenacious in terms of getting rights. And C.T. Vivian, the great C.T. Vivian, who's here in Atlanta now, but he was over there. So you had so many elements of people in that movement in Selma. Bevel, as you mentioned, Bevel and Jose. SNCC was there as well. Bernard Lafayette was actually working for SNCC, not SCLC then, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, for those people who don't know. And John was the chairman. But John actually came in conflict with people in SNCC because they didn't want to do that march. And they, it was always kind of a little thing going on between SCLC and SNCC.
Eventually they would force him out.
Yeah, but, right. Eventually, well, that was under a different set of circumstances with Stokely, but by and large, Hosea was going to he flipped a coin with Andy as to who would lead the march with John, because John was going to lead the march from SNCC. And Andy, and he often says he was very fortunate that he lost the bet, and Jose was assigned by SCLC to march across the bridge.
And it was indeed a bloody
It was a mess.
But the good thing was it was also probably one of the first televised for the world, because it went out on CBS and everybody. It went out worldwide.
And all the networks here. In those days, you didn't have, the cable networks. You had CBS, ABC, and NBC. And they all broke into the shows on Sunday night to show the horrors of horses and cops and policemen beating up people in Selma and the tear gas. And that went with that one picture from that night. Okay, went around the world, and that's what led Lyndon Johnson ultimately to say, "We shall overcome."
Yeah, gave the famous speech. Let's go back to Auburn Avenue. You're sitting. You end up in Atlanta.
Well, what happened was I was in Birmingham, and we just finished the movement and successfully gotten. And by the way, Orange was over there with us. Stony Cooks. I don't know if you remember that old name, Stony Cooks. He was over there, and Hosea was actually running the movement in Birmingham. All right, this was Birmingham 2. This is 66 in January. And we got the registrars there after about 3 or 4 weeks, and about 2,000 or 3,000 people being arrested again. Dr. King came several times over there. So we had a meeting, and I was going to come back to Atlanta, and we had an old Freedom House here in Atlanta on Johnson Avenue, which has been torn down.
Wow.
History again, gone. That was Dr. King's last house before he moved to Vine City, actually. It was Daddy King's house before that. And became SCLC's Freedom House, which Hosea ran. That's where he had his office over there, his field operation, Hosea's office. So I was going to come back and stay over there. Right on the other side, which is now John Wesley Dobbs, which Houston Street then, was a SNCC Freedom House. That's where we would come back and we'd stay. And so
talk a little bit about that, because we're glazing over a lot. And I know you short on time. But what was a Freedom House, so people get a sense? There had to be a place where you would come, even if you come from a place where anybody in the movement could come and rest and not have to pay rent and just go out and do their thing.
It was a retreat center for people that were out in the field, and from Albany, Georgia, to southern Alabama, to Mississippi. Would come Grenada, Mississippi, and they would come back and they would stay for the staffers, or even volunteers. There would be 5 or 6, 7 bedrooms up there, like a dorm style. And people would stay up there, and they would retreat, and then we'd have discussions and meetings and all this kind of stuff, and organize. And Snick had another house right around the corner. John Lewis stayed over there, and Cleve Sellers, and Stokely, actually. Julian Bond never stayed there because he was from Atlanta and he lived here. But, I mean, so many people would stay at the Snick house, and we were right behind each other. So we'd always get out there and talk and, and strategize. So I was going to stay there, and I took a bus from Birmingham and got off in front of the Auburn Avenue office of SCLC, 334 Auburn Avenue. 332 Auburn Avenue, and which is a building you're familiar with.
Yes.
Where the Prince Masons are, right? Prince Hall Masons. And WERD, the first major black radio station in the country, was founded. And, of course, Dr. King's very historic office was in that building with just one picture and no windows in that office, just one picture of Gandhi behind him. So I got off, and of course, in those days, it's hard for people to believe. We didn't have iPhones or iPads or cell phones, and we had to deal with a payphone. Does anybody know what a payphone looks like anymore? No one knows what a payphone looks like.
Ask somebody under 30 what a payphone is, they look at you like you growing horns out your head.
Right, exactly. And but there was a payphone right across the street from SCLC's office, right across.
So don't tell me you had to go out to use the payphone.
I was taking free Auburn Avenue bus from the Greyhound bus station downtown, which isn't there anymore. Down to SCLC's office was on a Sunday afternoon.
But are you doing all of this? How old are you at this point?
I am now just turned 19. Okay.
And what do you say when you tell your parents, look here?
My parents basically knew I was going to do whatever. They had no control over me. They told the principals of high schools that. They told everybody, said, this guy's on his own. He's been on his own since he was 12, which is true. But on my own, but I say, who ever went to get a degree from Martin Luther King Jr. University, a Nobel Prize-winning major leader of the millennium, Martin Luther King Jr., and I graduated from that school.
When we come back from the break, we're going to go straight to two things. The first time you met him.
You got it.
First time y'all had a conversation. And the first time they put the keys in your hand and told
that was Coretta.
We need you to drive either the King family or somebody. Who made that decision? Because somebody had to ultimately say, you didn't just walk up to Dr. King and say, I want to start driving you around.
I'll tell you about it.
Somebody had to vouch for you that you could get Dr. King in and about the city, in and out of the city, and his family, move him, the children, and Coretta Scott King around. When we come back, we'll talk to Tom Houck. We'll continue this conversation. We'll be back. It's News and Talk 1380 WAOK. All right, now, if y'all, we're going to sell the interview that happened off air. But that's really the good stuff. The stuff you talk about on there, just, Tom Houck been knowing Tom for a long time political fixture. Not only political fiction, but been in radio. Tom, tell us, you did all sides, radio, TV.
Well, I worked for Dr. King till his assassination for a year after with Abernathy and Young. My last role in SCLC, I did the Poor People's Campaign, the minority groups, poor white folks, Hispanics, Indians, and then after the Poor People's Campaign in Washington and Resurrection City, 40 days of actual hell, where it rained every day, the mud was thick, and never got it quite together. But I worked for Ralph until about a year after Martin's assassination. We were in Charleston, and that was my last official activity was to get the white folks involved in the community. And we did. Andy met with the city attorney Robert Morris Rosen, whose son was a friend of mine I'd met over there. But at any rate, so I left there and went to work with John Lewis for 2 years. And Julian Bond and John Lewis, that's when they were very close friends. This is prior to them running against each other for Congress. Yeah. I did voter registration around the Southeast. We probably registered 1 million voters. I did these campaigns where John and Julian would come into the towns and speak at the churches and the mass rallies. And left there in 71 to go to Washington to head up an organization to get the 18-year-old vote, which we did. And I headed up that organization in 72. Unfortunately, the results weren't very good. I think there was McGovern won one state, which was Massachusetts. But I left there and I came back to Atlanta and I helped a little bit with Maynard Jackson's campaign, and then Andy's campaign for Congress, and then I got involved in writing in Atlanta Magazine, Politically Speaking, and for 20 years had a talk show in WGST. In the days when you could have some lefties on the radio, you can't anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what.
I mean, you got to have black radio.
Dying breed.
You got to have black radio or racist white radio. I mean, it's a shame because I mean, you don't have the kind of give and take out there. And there was a vast right wing conspiracy in the 1990s from the Rush Limbaughs and so forth. Hannity actually owes me his at least half of his check. Because when I left GST, he took my job. Let's
take you back to standing on the corner of Auburn Avenue, standing in front of the Prince Hall building where Dr. King's office was. He pulls up and he has who with him?
He had Yolanda. He had sitting in front seat was Coretta, and then in the back were the 4 kids because they were small then. Bernice was just 3 or 4 years old.
What year is this again?
It's 1966, and Bernice was small, or we used to call her Bunny,
right.
And Yolanda Yoki. Was in the back seat, and Dexter and Dex, and Marty, who was then known as Marty. He's known as Martin now.
III.
Right, Martin III now, and they were there. And so I, very simply, Dr. King asked me if we wanted to ride to the Freedom House, and I said, no. I said, someone's coming to pick me up. And he said, oh, no, I'll give you a ride. And then I get in the car. He asked me if I had lunch. And I said, I haven't eaten yet. He said, well, you're going to come home and have lunch with us. So, I mean, you can't imagine this. Here I am, a 19-year-old white kid. You're sitting in a car with not just a civil rights leader, but a man that you're superhero.
In 66, because I've asked different people,
right.
Bolden, Jose, other.
He was only 37 years old.
37, but you all had no idea. Did you at that point?
Oh.
By that time,
Derrick, I would have saved my paychecks, my $15, $25 stipends with his signature on them if I had known how famous those would have been today. I mean, I needed $15 to $25.
You ain't got no stuff to weigh in no book.
No,
or nothing.
right? Got a few.
I come help you look for them.
I've got a few things, but over the years, when you're that young, you lose stuff.
Did not know,
and I didn't keep it. Right. But I mean, if I had kept it, I mean, believe me, that $15 paycheck with his name and Abernathy. Abernathy co-signed the checks. Wow. But a lot of people don't know this. Ralph Abernathy was Martin Luther King Jr.'s best friend and
Let me tell you, you got to come with me.
And Abernathy's almost lost in history,
You got to come with me on Sunday. We're doing something for Little Ralph.
Oh, you really?
He has liver cancer. Yeah. And he's preaching at Reverend Motley's church in Lindsay Street. We're going to be there. I'm going to tell you about it afherward. I need you to come by there. Because he would love to see you.
Of course, he grew up. Little Ralph grew up with me.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I get over to the King house, and they were talking, and Coretta asked me.
Now he's at Sunset.
Sunset, 234 Sunset, and the house still stands there, and hopefully, in the not too distant future, the National Park Service will take that over, and then right next door. Maynard's father was the pastor of Friendship Baptist Church, Maynard Jackson, right, was father, and he built a sort of like a parsonage for the church, which is right next door. It's a crumbling building, but there's 4 different units, and Maynard actually grew up in that building next door to Dr. King. He was gone by the time the King family moved there in 63. But Sunset Avenue is a very historic street. And Dr. King had 4 funeral parlor directors live next door to him down to where Julian Bond lived on Sunset as well. But anyway, so I get over there. And I'm kind of like, I'm in awe. I mean, absolute awe. And I'm just thinking now, what's Jose going to say about this? Here I am over here, having
eating chicken and everything
right,
at the King house.
Right, in the King house.
What did he like? What did Doc like to eat?
Well, he liked a lot of different things. One thing that, by the way, he loved eating chitlins, but Coretta wouldn't cook them, and she wouldn't let him in the house. But Juanita Abernathy cooked them, so Ralph would always
come on over
and get yourself some chitlins.
Because people don't realize that Coretta Scott King was a professionally trained
singer. Oh, absolutely. That's when they met in Boston. She was at the New England Conservatory, and he was in theology school. And they got married, actually, in Alabama. They didn't get married in Atlanta at Ebenezer. They got married in her backyard down in Marion, Alabama. And by the way, that's also where Andy Young's wife, Jean Young's from, and it's also where Juanita Abernathy's from.
Wow.
I mean, the unique aspect of that whole thing is incredible.
So you end up at dinner, and at what point do they say, okay, we need you to drive our kids around?
All right, this is what happened. We had finished lunch, okay? It was about 12 or 14 out of lunch. Dr. King and Mrs. King had a cook or a housekeeper, Mrs. Lockhart. No, there was no referring to her by her first name. She was Mrs. Lockhart, and everybody called her Mrs. Lockhart. You know, I mean, it was that kind of respect in the household.
Certainly.
And she actually had lunch with us.
Talk about her, because we never
at
heard
the table.
about her.
Okay.
But you can imagine with him being traveling.
Oh yeah,
for babies, somebody need to help.
Right.
We don't hear much about Miss Lockhart. Tell us
Miss
about
Lockhart,
her.
she was a phenomenal woman. She was she took care of the house. She took care of the kids, and Coretta took care of the kids a lot. By the way, I mean, I'm not gonna. Coretta was an excellent mother, and Martin was a good father. I mean, when he traveled a lot, but when he was in town, he took great care of the kids. He would take them to the Butler Street Y to swim. He would play basketball with them. He showed them. There was a pool table downstairs. He showed them some of his newest moves on the pool table.
Because he was a voracious pool player.
In
fact, Bolden said he meets him at playing pool in Savannah.
But Martin, this is funny. He was. I want to give away some tour tickets here, but I'm asking somebody a trick question about my civil rights story. But anyway, Dr. King would always he always visioned himself as a hustler. And he would do a little betting on the side. People get mad at me when I talk about him being a chain smoker.
He was a human being.
Or he take a little taste once in a while. You know, I mean, he wasn't a voracious drinker or anything like that. But so anyway, I had lunch. Going back to the situation and with the family, I remember exactly what I had. You know, he had fried chicken and she had gravy and mashed potatoes and corn and and chicken livers. And all kinds of stuff. Ham. It was a big lunch for 12 people for lunch sitting at their table. There I am sitting at that. So Dr. King had to go somewhere, and right after lunch, and the kids wanted me to play football with them outside. So I said, okay, I would. So I went outside with Dexter and Martin. And Isaac Farris, their cousin, came over, and so did Ralph. Free sticks. That's what they used to call them, free sticks. And so I was playing football with them outside, and they gave me an affectionate name, I guess a double entendre of sorts. They called me Uncle Tom.
Uncle Tom.
Uncle Tom.
Oh, hold on one second, Uncle Tom. We got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to this Uncle Tom for sure when we come back. Tom Houck, our special guest today. Man, what a wonderful conversation. And we're going to help Tom figure out how we can give away some tickets. He does a civil rights show. When we come back, we're going to tell you about that. We'll be back. It's News and Talk 1380 WAOK. All right, welcome back to News and Talk 1380 WAOK. What a wonderful conversation. Tom Houck, we can go
I'm
on
enjoying
and
it.
on,
I'm
man.
enjoying it.
And welcome back home to radio.
I love it. You know, I've been coming to this radio station for years, and I want to say this again. I don't know that people heard.
Yeah.
But when I was driving Dr. King,
Right.
all right, when I was driving Dr. King back in 1966, he would listen to AOK, and he'd turn it up full blast.
In fact,
In those days, it was a lot of music.
yeah. We got pictures with him standing behind the WAOK.
And he loved
He would come here.
WAOK.
He would come here to
He
tell people what
loved
was
Martin
going
Luther
on.
King Jr. loved WAOK.
Talk about this a little bit, and then I got to get to Daddy King because we mentioned him. Because when you show up with Martin and maybe driving Coretta and others, who actually tells you, Tom, I really need you to drive?
All right.
Because to drive
All right.
somebody
What
around.
what happened was this, all right? I'm not going to mention the name of the former driver, but the King were having problems with the driver, okay? And he's still alive and lives in Atlanta, so I'm not going to mention his name.
Okay.
So I come back in from playing football from the outside with the kids, as I just told you, with that. Playing football with
Uncle Tom.
Uncle Thompson.
And
I come back
and
inside.
that's just to make people understand, affectionately in the movement.
Oh, yeah.
All of the
Right.
big guys,
Right.
Abernathy,
Uncle.
the kids refer to him as Uncle. Uncle
absolutely.
Hosen, Uncle
Andy,
Ed,
right,
and
right.
still do today.
Exactly, still
Yeah.
do today. So anyway, I come back inside the house, and Miss King is working at her desk over in the corner outside from the dining room. And I said, I'm going to call to get somebody to pick me up from the Freedom House. And so she says to me, I've been having trouble with my driver. I know you don't know much about Atlanta. And I said, no, I know a little bit. I don't know a whole bunch. But as a kid, I had my own GPS in me. Just land me in the middle of a city, and I know where to go. Mm-hmm. So she said, well, would you mind taking the kids to school tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. What am I going to say? What am I going to say? No.
You ate a chicken up.
What am I going to say? No. I said, I
so
said,
what did the kids go to school at? What were you taking them?
She asked to see my license. She said, I assume you have a license. And I said, yes, I do. Okay. And she said, well, the kids need to be at school at 7. Need to come on at 7 o'clock. Okay. And she said, you're welcome to spend the night here. And I said, no. I said, I'm going to go over to the Freedom House. So I call Jose up, and he freaked out. What are you doing over there? You said the King's house had lunch? What's this? What's going on? Jose.
Because that should have been a line of demarcation.
Right.
You just got to town, don't even know what Butler Street why is, and now you talking about you finna drive the Kings around.
Right, we'll take the kids to school the next part. And then he said, let me talk to Martin. He says, okay, let me speak to Dr. King. And I said, he's not here. I said, but Miss King's here. So he talks to him, and Coretta says, this is a funny story. Coretta said, yeah, we thought Tom would be a good person to drive the kids to school tomorrow. And, of course, Jose wasn't going to say no to Coretta, all right? So I wound up being the driver and coming the next day.
I can hear Jose there. But put that Uncle Tom on the phone.
Right. So, I get back over to the house, and he's going on and on and on. And then Ben Clark, who used to be one of the assistants back then in those days, and his brother Charles Clark were at the house, and Terry ran up. Terry said, what are you doing going over here to the King house? All of them were like, it was almost like they were jealous. I mean, the fact that I had gone to have lunch, I was going to drive for them. But no, she never asked me for my driver's license. Daddy King. The next day, I went to bring some mail from the from Ebenezer Baptist Church business office, which is still there, right next to the old Ebenezer, the historic Ebenezer. Mm-hmm. And I saw Dr. King, Daddy King, who had never met me, said, Greta lost her mind hiring a white boy? And I said, no, I work at SCLC. I was explaining to him. But Dad was the one that was, real. I mean, we're talking about 1966. Driving 4 black kids around Atlanta, and we're not talking for many years. We're talking about the same time when the Klan marched down the street. So was I nervous? Yes. But was I scared? No. I guess I had no scare. And certainly the Kings weren't. They had I had big back then, kind of like a bushy-haired afro almost, and I looked like a radical student. Mm-hmm. And so I mean, it was like interesting me driving the kids around. But I'll tell you something. I learned Atlanta fast. My first doctor was Dr. Palmer, who was their doctor. Mm-hmm. My first dentist was Walter Young, who was their dentist then. And even at 86, I guess I got all my teeth. That's Andy Young's brother, for those who don't know.
Absolutely.
He's still a dentist.
I saw.
But, one of my best friends was Jake Henderson, whose parents were founded one of the first black major travel agencies in the country.
I traveled to Ghana with Jake.
Yankee.
Yeah, man. You talking about who? And a wonderful time.
Jake. By working for 9 months, I actually drove for the Kings. I actually went out of town with Dr. King a couple times. I'd pick him up at the airport, and that's when we really would listen to AOK on the way back into town. And he'd smoke a couple cigarettes on the way back into town, and I'd be driving him. But he'd drive sometimes himself. He had a heavy foot. I'm just letting you know. I mean, he was a fast driver, and he was like Bill Campbell when he was mayor. Would tell the what we call it, executive protection, not to drive that he was going to drive. Mm-hmm. So I mean, Daddy. I mean, Dr. King would many times drive the car. We drove 2 different cars. They had a green 1966 Bonneville, and they had a blue 1966 Chevrolet Impala. And that Chevrolet Impala is still in the basement of the house on Auburn Avenue.
In fact, not on Auburn, on Sunset.
On Sunset, rather, right.
And I've heard if you walk in that house, and this is what I heard, I don't know, it's almost like it was untouched.
Well, the living room is. I haven't been in there in a year. Although I'm trying to get in there.
1968.
But I take people on my tour over there. Matter of fact, John Lewis the other day, we were all taking the tour.
The boy from Troy.
The boy from Troy, Four Corners, Alabama. John Robert Lewis. It was one of my dear friends, by the way.
No doubt.
Right, he's one of my dearest friends. And so he led the tour. Matter of fact, Bill Campbell came on that tour. Kwanzaa Hall came on the tour. A lot of different people came on the tour that day. And remarkable when you talk about that house on Sunset. That was the house Martin Luther King Jr. lived in when he was assassinated. And that's where the kids grew up. Yep. And it was that.
Well, Martin was still living there for a long time.
Oprah actually got Coretta out of the house. Yeah. But then Marty moved back in.
Right, yeah. So, but just wonderful history. Now, you got a few more minutes because you guys hang around. We're going to let you ask your question and let you give away your tickets and have somebody email you. Tom Houck, our special guest, my good friend. You know,
indeed.
What
can I say? You know, I mean, I love. And by the way, I love doing the Civil Rights Tour, and I've been doing it for 8 months. And I'm gonna tell folks about it.
We're gonna tell people about the tour, what they see. Great history. We'll be back in a moment. Don't go into place. Stick and stay. Tom Houck, our special guest, driver for Coretta Scott King, the King children, and Dr. King, eyewitness to history. We'll be back. It's News and Talk 1380 WAOK. Welcome back to News and Talk 1380 WAOK. What a wonderful conversation. I'm throwing my hand up again. Wonderful conversation we had yesterday. Had Skip Mason.
Great, by the way, historian. I love Skip. Skip is great. He has a Facebook page called Vanishing Georgia. And Vanishing Black Georgia.
Black Atlanta.
Black Atlanta, right. And absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, he was here yesterday.
Skip does a good job. He was living in Augusta now.
Yeah, he's in Augusta.
Preaching down there.
Preaching at the CME Church. But it just a repository. We went to dinner afterwards. And I would take you to them, but you're rushing out of here.
I get this thing. I had to back schedule myself this week.
But here's what we want to do. You got some tickets. You do a Civil Rights Tour. Tell us about it, and then we're
let me tell you what happened. Back in April, last April, for years, and people, I know Derrick. People come in town, and they want you to show them
absolutely
what history was in Atlanta, and you know it well. And so, but for years, people would always come, and I'd always give them a tour. All right. Well, Andy actually, he said to me, Tom, you ought to be thinking about getting a bus and taking folks around town. There's not really a lot of tours around here. And I said, this is a great idea. So I came up with Civil Rights Tour Atlanta, and you can see the little logo there with the signs, okay? And Andy Young, Julian Bond, John Lewis, Valerie Jackson, among others, Lonnie King, who was the head of the student movement back in the 60s, for those who don't know, and several others were on a 22-minute video done by Crawford Media, which is a great company here.
Oh, yeah.
And we pick up in front of Ebenezer, between the old Ebenezer Baptist Church and the King Center, in front of the King grave on Auburn Avenue at 10:45 on Saturday mornings for the public tour. I do custom tours, by the way, as well. And those who, we have a family reunion coming to town, or if you, a member of a fraternity or sorority or church or, whatever, these custom tours are great. And I work things in for your church or for your corporations. And Coke does a lot of work with me. For people coming from all over the world, Coca-Cola, and I've got a lot of Presbyterian churches coming up, other schools coming in. I'm going to do again this summer. I did last summer the Centers of Hope for the city of Atlanta. I'm getting ready to take the police cadets on a little tour of Atlanta. I can't wait for this one.
Oh wow! I need to be on that one.
That will be a good one.
Me and a couple of the Black Lives Matter.
Right. I'm gonna take them over there to Butler Street Y and just
absolutely
park them in front.
You gotta tell them that.
Right. History. That was where the first black police officers had to change their clothes. They couldn't go in 1948.
Didn't have a gun. Couldn't arrest white people.
I couldn't. Right. A black cop had to be. And Auburn Avenue got street lights and police the same year, in 1948, a deal that was made by Hartsfield, who was by the way, Hartsfield was no integrationist.
Not at all.
Not at all. He was a segregationist, but he was a segregationist who had a guy from Coca-Cola named Woodruff basically controlling him.
Yeah.
So he had
a man of his time, as we say.
Right, and he cut a deal with John Wesley Dobbs.
Tell him you got to come back, because I know you got to go.
So, but anyway, Civil Rights Tour Atlanta leaves every Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning from Auburn Avenue. It's a pricey ticket, but you also get a voucher to go to the Center for Civil and Human Rights. And if you want a ticket this weekend, I have four extra tickets, okay? Mm-hmm. What you need to do is, and are you listening? Get a pen or paper. Get there on your little tablet or whatever. You take down my email. It's THOUCK@mindspring.com. And if you can tell me the name of Martin Luther King Jr. at birth, his first name at birth, I will take the first four that I get at my email address, and you will have a ticket to my tour this weekend. That's THOUCK@mindspring.com. It's a 2.5-hour tour. Bus loads at 10:45 a.m. We leave promptly at 11. If you're not there at 11, we take off without you.
There you go.
And we go on the west side, 23 different locations, into one of the most historic cemeteries, Derrick. One of the most historic cemeteries in Atlanta, but a lot of people don't know about who's buried there. And I'm talking about Southview Cemetery.
Yeah, that's my family cemetery. And we talked a little bit about it yesterday. So if they heard yesterday, they'll know there are bishops there.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's John Wesley Dobbs. Herman
King
Russell was just
there.
buried.
I didn't know they buried Herman.
Yeah,
there.
Herman there. And
and
so is it Jesse Hill.
Let them know that also Dr. King was buried there.
Dr. King was buried there, and Daddy and Mama King are buried there. And Mama King's father is buried there.
Let me tell you this.
And Andy Young's wife, first wife, Carolyn's buried there. And John Lewis's wife, Lillian's buried there.
In another 50 years, I'll be out there.
Well, Julian Bond, I don't want to give it away. You'll see it on my Civil Rights Tour Atlanta. But, by the way, you can go to my website, too, www.civilrightstour.com. It's www.civilrightstour.com.
Tom Houck, thank you, man.
Hey, listen, my pleasure. I'm going to come back. If you ever go on vacation, let me know.
No, I would never let you come in here. I'm trying to take my good, high-paying job. I tell you what, I'll split half day if you split that bus tour with me. Tom, you see how Tom slid in there. It's kind of pricey. That took about $2,000, but y'all come together. I'm just kidding. It's a wonderful tour.
It's going very well, by the way. Since over 4,000 people have taken my tour since April.
I have already.
Last year.
People done told me about it.
Right.
People done told me about it. April 4th, 1968. Where were you at, Tom?
Where was I April 4th? I was working for the Poor People's Campaign. I was in Chattanooga. I was actually in Knoxville, Tennessee, organizing some poor white folks to become part of the Poor People's Campaign. And I came right back to Atlanta and helped organize transportation for the funeral. From Abernathy's basement of the West 100th Street Baptist Church. That was our headquarters for the transportation for the funeral. The funeral was on April 9th. So I came right back to Atlanta that night on April 4th. There's a book called The Funeral, The Funeral of a King, which tells a lot about that.
Tom Houck, thank you, man. We love you, my brother.
I appreciate being on your show. I appreciate being on your show.
You need to
You're
come
the
back.
star. You're the hero.
No, bro. I am just trying to do.
I'm just sitting over here next to the.
Trying to hold it high for Esmond Patterson, Tippy Calloway, Zella Mays.
Strong. Strong line
Piano
up here.
Red, and all of those other folks.
Strong line up here. And by the way, let me say one more thing. I do a commentary for a CBS station here in Atlanta, CBS 46, called Just a Minute. Yeah. So if you can catch a chance, whenever it's on, 3 or 4 times a month, I do commentaries for them. But I was in radio and TV for years.
Yep. Thank you, Tom.
I appreciate you, man.
Now you know what I'm start calling you from now on.
What you
Let's
gonna
go,
call me?
my friend Uncle Tom.
Uncle Tom. I love it. I love it.
We'll be back in a moment. It's News and Talk 1380 WAOK.
WAOK Atlanta. WVEE HD3. News and Talk 1380. WAOK.